Hey everybody, this is Krishna, and this is the last part of my Twilight Zone Rod Serling magazine cover creation. So in the last video, I talked about some coloring techniques, and I've gone through that whole process there. In this video, I'm planning on sharing some advanced techniques that I think may help you out with regards to making your colors pop a little bit more. So we're going to talk about colors. We're also going to talk about adding some textures and just sprucing this up a little bit more. If you've seen the thumbnail, you kind of have an idea of where I'm going with this. So I'll start the conversation by sharing some of the assets that I'm planning on using. So this program is called Graphic Converter. It's on the Mac, and I primarily use it to organize and clearly see all of my design assets. And below here, I've got all of my quote-unquote favorites. So I've got, watercolor textures, I've got dusty textures, etc. I've got a UPC code, and these are just design elements that I'm going to be bringing in and using on this particular illustration. So this particular application will be off screen, and I'll just bring in components so you can see how I'm going to work with it. All right, so that being said, let's first start off by taking a look at how I've got everything organized here. This is all grouped. I have a ton of layers, so I've just organized everything out to where it's manageable. And I'm going to start off by bringing that UPC code in. I'll move this up to the topmost layer. So here's the UPC code. It does not have any white background, so I'm going to go ahead and create that, make a new layer underneath that. And just drag an elliptical marquee or rectangular marquee tool. Fill that in. I'll give it a stroke. I'll group the two together. I'll rotate it 90 degrees. If you hold down the Shift key, you can fix the rotation. And I want to now scale it down with the Transform tool, like so. So these are all components that will, I guess, make it more readily identifiable as a magazine. It's a small touch, but I think it works. And while I'm at it, I'll just go ahead and group this as UPC so I can find it a little bit easier later on. And something else I want to go ahead and point out here too, if you click directly, or right click rather, underneath the eyeball, you can actually assign a color for your various groups. So like, for example, trade dress, which contains all of the text information in the header. If I wanted to give that a specific color, just simply right click underneath the eye and you can give it a color. And that can make it easier for you to find things as you work. All right, so I've got that part in here. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to add a little bit of a glow to these pixels or grids. So if I go over here, you can see that I've already had those added in, but if you go under FX, I'm going to first of all choose outer glow, and I'll pick a kind of a light green color like so. And with this outer glow, you can actually control its spread and its size. And so I want it to be a little bit more intense. I'm going to bring the spread in. I'm going to increase the size to give it that kind of a glowing effect. Next, what I'd like to do is I'd like to add some smoke coming from Rod Serling's cigarette. What that will do is it will create a set of explicit leading lines that are pointing us back from the right-hand side towards the focal point. So with this, I'm going to use the lasso tool, just the regular lasso tool, and I'll just make a selection like so. I'll fill it in with black, and I'll deselect by hitting Command D. And quick move to go ahead and switch to the Move tool to drop the opacity. If you hit the V key, you get to the Move tool. And then if I type in the number 3, I have a 30% transparent image. I can make it maybe 20%. And the leading lines that I'm referring to here are the outlines of that cigarette smoke. They're pulling us back in towards the focal point, which is Rod Serling himself. So if I wanted to clean that up a little bit too, I want to kind of give that organic look. There we go. And now I want to add some dots. So I'll bring back my graphic converter so you can see what I'm pulling from here. If I look at my dusty textures, there's all sorts of different dust variations, and what I'm looking for here is something that mimics the dust that you would get from a cigarette smoke. So I'm going to pick this particular one right here because I think that seems like it's a good fit. So all I have to do is I can drag in to Photoshop, and you can see that it's placed as a smart object. In fact, right now it's got some transform tools, and I never just work with the texture as is. I always like to modify it. So I'll either move it into place like this, I'll rotate it, I'll hit enter, and so those particles also kind of add a little bit more texture to the cigarette and kind of adds a little more visual interest. All right, so now that I've got that done, the next thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit of grain to the television set itself to kind of give it that old school vibe. So again, if I pull out Graphic Converter, again, this is just an organizational tool. On Windows, I'm not sure, you could probably use Bridge or something like that. I like this particular tool. It's basically an image viewing tool that makes it very easy for me to organize all my design assets instead of having to open up a Finder window and look through all these thumbnails. Everything is right there. So that's something that I would highly recommend. All right, so I've got these various kind of staticky images that have rounded rects around them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this one. I'll drag it over here. And I'll position this. I need to organize its shape to kind of better conform to the television set. So I'll hit Command T, and I will first try perspective, like so. And then I will use the scale. If I hold the Shift key down, I can constrain the scale to one side. There we go. All right, so now what I can do is with that, I can move this down. I've already got a previous version over here. I can move it down to where it's only going to be covering the TV set. And I want to edit this. I obviously don't want this texture to appear everywhere, but I do like it around his jacket. And I want to kind of make this effect a little bit more subtle. So what I can do is if I can right click and choose rasterize layer, that makes it something that I can edit and modify. I do want to trim this particular part out. Let me show you a technique that I can use for that. I can first hide that layer, use the magic wand tool to select the right, this trim that's right here, reveal the layer that I just hid, and I can hit Command X, and that basically cuts that part out. And so what I can do now is I can go ahead and try some various layer effects. Let's just see if, let's see, soft light. I'll do soft light. So it gives me this really nice crackly texture. And I don't want it to be really on his hands so much. So what I'll do is I'll just, with the lasso tool, since I've rasterized the object, I can go ahead and just simply trim all of this. The idea is that the left side, he's kind of in TV, and on the right side, he's actually popping out of the TV set. So I'm just going to get rid of that. I do like a little bit of that texture underneath his arm, so I'm going to use the Option key to deselect. So I think that works pretty okay. And so now I've got that component placed in there. The next thing I want to do is I want to play with a little bit of nuance in terms of the colors. The colors are flat colors, and I want to be able to make them a little bit more subtle. So I'm going to go back to Graphic Converter. I have these watercolor backgrounds, and the way I'm choosing these watercolor backgrounds, I'll just show you a little sneak peek. I've got them organized by color. So there's winter, there's summer, and what I'm looking for is warm colors. And I can always dial the colors in. And I'm also looking for colors that don't have a lot of hard edges. You can see that there's a lot of hard edges here. I don't want dots, so I'm looking very, very specifically to find something that is going to be, that is going to work. Let's try this. Let's see, warm. And I like the oranges and the reds. I'm going to just try this fall watercolor here. I'm going to drag that over. I'm going to move that to the topmost layer. And I'm just going to extend this all the way out so I can just see what it's going to look like. And again, with our layer styles, I can see a variety of different options here. Some of them look more crazy than others. Yeah, I like the overlay. I think that looks pretty good. And I don't want that to kind of impede on the trade dress or the header here, so I'm just going to move this to the layer below that. And I need to still modify this. If you look really closely here, you can see that some of those textures are kind of appearing, and it looks a little bit like I put a texture on there, right? So I'll hit Command T. I'll just scale that out a little bit more, like so. So the texture work is there, but it's not so evident where you see these, you know, hard edges that are on there. So you can also rotate the texture as you see fit. If you want to, you can even play with, you know, dialing in the hue if you want to make it a little bit more, you know, like this particular shade, you can do that. And then when you're done with it, you can always right-click, rasterize the layer. And then I want to get rid of where that texture is overlapping that black rectangle, so I can just move this to the layer underneath. And there we go. So I think it's a good idea to have a collection of textures and other design assets. You can get them from a lot of resources. I recommend creativemarket.com. There's also Design Cuts. Look for those sales where they will lump a bunch of things together like fonts and textures, etc. They'll usually put it for a very reasonable price. Check the licensing on these textures too, because some of them will grant you full commercial license to where you can use them on commercial projects. Some of the assets do not. So you have to read the terms to make sure that you understand what you're looking for here too. So that's basically it. You know, I think I could probably add a few more things too. There's a point in time where you just have to stop and just kind of, step away from the object here. But this looks pretty good. Let's just do a grayscale test. A grayscale test just allows me to see what this will look like if I'm just looking at it from a contrast perspective or a value perspective. So if I go to View, Proof Setup, if I choose Custom, and I've talked about this in previous videos, but if you're new to the channel, this is probably something you're not familiar with. Under Device to Simulate, if you choose Work in Gray, dot gain of 20%, you can see a quick grayscale representation. And what I'm looking for here are there any contrast issues? Are things starting to blend together? Is it difficult to see certain things? And if it is, I can make certain tweaks. Like one thing that I'm noticing here is the pixels, the outlines are a little bit subtle. Is that a deal breaker? No, I still think I can see those pixels pretty well. The outlines aren't really a problem. So I've got good contrast. And the other nice thing about this grayscale test that I'm showing you is you can use Command Y to toggle between your grayscale and your color values, which makes it very, very convenient for you to check on the fly. Now, before learning that keyboard shortcut, I would actually, flatten the layers, and then I would open up the Hue Saturation slider, and I would just drag the saturation all the way to the left, and that just becomes very tedious, and it's not really conducive. I'll leave it with one more trick here. These knobs look a little bit flat. So what I'll do is I'll go into the layer that contains the colors here. You can see that there's just a ton of layers. And I've got the knob center. I've labeled these just, and I normally don't do this, but I just wanted to be able to find this quickly when I'm actually making the video. I'll use my elliptical marquee tool. I'll hit Command J, Command U, just to give that knob a little bit more three-dimensionality. And I'll make a copy by hitting Command J and moving that down below like that. So it gives it a little bit more of a 3D look as opposed to just a flat look. And that's where I'm going to leave this one. So if you found this to be useful, please give it a thumbs up so other folks can find it. If you're new to the channel, again, welcome. Consider subscribing. We're very close to hitting a milestone 1,000 subscribers. I wouldn't be doing this unless folks found this to be valuable. So please let me know what you'd like me to talk about or topics for future videos in the comments. And I will see you in the next one.